All right, guys, so the fundamental need that we face in life to grow, to integrate, is to have a regulated nervous system. A regulated nervous system essentially means that you can hold the space within yourself of safety, love, belonging, a sense of home that exists within, so that you can be more open to the things that are happening around you, have less of a need to micromanage and control things, don't need to shape the outcomes to such intensity and then be anxious about whether or not that will come to life. You can instead focus on where you are, how you're feeling, your processes, the things that you have more control over. And we're going to talk about physically practicing and training to cultivate this ability, but also the beautiful benefit of this is the more you work in, the more you end up gaining control of the outside world without trying. Because what you're doing when you're working in is you're cultivating this relationship with yourself, and you're meeting experience as it comes into you through the senses and the environment and your people, places, practices in an alchemical way, meaning you're turning it into gold. And because you're such a relationships expert, when you cultivate this, you end up being able to offer such energy and love to the relationships around you that things start to take shape in the ways you would like, because you're teaching other people how to experience life on your wavelength, because you're so capable of holding that space and not being pushed into reactivity, pushed out of your groove because someone says this or does that. So you can start to see now how, regardless of your main priorities, whether it's growing a business, whether it's maintaining a beautiful family, whether it's learning about yourself as a younger person, or whether it's even preparing for the later phases of life or going through illness, regulating your nervous system and cultivating this inner space is absolutely essential, because it is all wrapping life in this sense of beauty and okayness, even amongst and especially amongst the chaos. So now, if we get into how this practice is going to look specifically, and how we can use this practice to compound in other areas of life, then what we need to do is start finding, locating, experiencing this way of being, love, safety, belonging, home, while then slightly stress testing and bringing in new elements or parts of experience. So basically, things that feel like home, familiar, love, safety, and belonging, those are the parts you already consider to be you. If you have a tiny sense of self, then everything you meet, even physical sensations, like if your sense of self is shriveled up and it just exists behind the eyes in the head, then things that you can feel from your arms, your back, your legs, they can all feel like invaders from outside. The body is like an invader. When the body speaks, you're like, who are you? Get out of my house. So what we do when we expand the sense of self or expand the sense of home through a more regulated nervous system, and we start to load and stress test that, is we're bringing the parts back in to be enveloped by this sense of self. So as the self expands, things which are perceived as being external or threatening or challenging to deal with, that we have to manage, don't need to be managed anymore, because they're part of you and it's okay, and you're more complex. So the sense of self expands, and then suddenly we're aware of our breath, we're aware of our belly, our heartbeat. And I would suggest that the first step in practicing is to reclaim the midline. Remember the midline. Dismemberment, a head without a body, is the mind-body disconnect that is endemic, or I guess that's the right word, in the modern way of living. Everyone struggles with this mind-body disconnect. We know we have it. We know it's a neglected aspect of our humanity. So what we need to do is remember, reconnect, reintegrate the body and the head, because they are one thing, and having this perceived separation creates suffering because it's an illusion. we are also, in part, what our body gives us, or at least that's a shaping part of our experience. So reclaiming the spine, the breath, walking, sitting, knowing your axis of being, the mountain posture, Tadasana, standing. This is a great place to start. Walking, standing, seated meditation, meditation lying down, bringing the awareness to the spine, the midline, and the breath. That regulates the nervous system by itself, because that is the crux of this sense of home, safety, belonging. It's where the nervous system originates. It's the trunk of the tree as the nerves branch out and start to sense the world through their tendrils and tentacles. It gives you this intuitive sense of your body and a reference point that you can come back to. And because you now know your midline is also where the diaphragms and sphincters are. Like, are you clenching up? Are you holding tension in your pelvic floor? Are you holding tension through this diaphragm, your lungs, breathing shallowly, not expanding and contracting your rib cage? Are you sucking your belly in because you're stressed? Are you tense through the shoulders, the neck, the traps, the jaw, the face? What you tend to find is that the extremities will relax, the face, the mouth, the belly, the chest, and you will rest into your skeletal structure rather than binding into muscular structure when you have this reference of the midline. When you don't know where home is, middle way, spine, axis, you don't know how to rest into that, you end up trying to grab externally, and you're desperately trying to clutch for safety and belonging and love and home impulsively, compulsively, externally, like this muscular tension. And so we find that the external layers of us become dominant in our life and in our awareness of ourselves. We start to focus on the exterior. And so a lot of life is, when we come into this journey of learning to regulate the nervous system and start to practice body-mind disciplines, we're coming at it from the outside, gradually realizing that what we've been clutching at isn't creating that sense of love, safety, belonging, and home that we were really looking for. And all humans are looking for this same sense of themselves. But not everyone knows that they can feel it here. When you realize you can, then you start to invest in that. But if you don't think that's possible because you've never had any reference point, then you don't have your own spine and structure to rest into and to support you. So the journey of letting go of needing to control everything externally starts with finding structure in the body. Without this structure and stability, physically felt, tangible, not imagined, how can I expect anyone to feel at home? How can I tell someone to not micromanage? How can I say, just relax? They don't have a physical reference point of what that actually means. And so it's just words. You can't tell or beat someone into submission in this sense. You can't educate them without referring to their body, because their body needs to be their teacher, not the words which are empty without this reference. So we come into the spine. We realize how much our physicality is affecting our everyday because we're getting pulled into the exterior, into muscle tone, into controlling, grasping. At least if you're operating on this level, training your muscles, and you're aware of your physical appearance, that's some form of coming in from the external and looking after yourself. But we can do even better than that. We can do even more holistic and deep. We can start to work with our postural holding patterns in seated, standing, walking postures. We can become aware of where the tension is residing and how we can start to find our axis, find our breath. Axis meaning posture. Breath meaning support, giving, taking the internal massage of life force, and the airbag, which our upper body rests upon to feel buoyant on our hips and our legs. We'll go into that a little bit. So finding the axis means finding a sense of length from the sit bones or the tail through to the floor, to the center of the earth via gravity, up through to the crown of the head, the beautiful lotus flower. We have this sense of magnetism towards the center of the earth through gravity. We have this sense of the alignment of our poles being tall through the back of the crown. So when I say crown, I'm not thinking here, I'm thinking back of the head. It's almost like an extension of the back of the neck being long, like I'm being drawn up by my ponytail. And some people speak about a silver string being stretched, like the spinal cord is being stretched from heaven to earth. Within this analogy, we could look at how there are particular ligaments in the spine which, when lengthened and expanded, can create a released, relaxed response for the nervous system. But we don't need to. It's just this sense of length and holding in the posture, sitting, residing in your center. So this. We can have different calibrations and perceptions of what straight is in our body. For now, it's not about someone telling you to get straight. It's partly working on that over time, but it's mainly an internal feeling because you want to develop your own compass. That's the muscle you want to flex. What does aligned and long feel like for me? And then if we look from the side on, then there's stuff like this, there's stuff like this, there's the tilt of the head, there's the gaze, flaring, dropping down the ribs. You want to feel like you're softening and relaxing the exterior and you're able to drape your muscles down over the bones. And that should guide you to an intuitive sense of what your most effective posture for this is right now. Knowing that as your soft tissues change and as your mode of being in the world changes and your muscles and strength areas change, your posture will also change and reshape. But right now, the intuitive sense of length residing in your center, not residing just in the front and not just shrinking away from yourself, that's what we want to look for. So you can explore this. Where are my ranges? What are the margins of my experience? What are my horizons? And what does it feel like to be ever closer to this ever regressing tiny speck of centration within my being? How can I find that? And that's the drawing inward to the center of the eye at the center of the storm, which is drawing outward. It's the center of the spiral. When you rotate, when you move, when you walk, it's the center, the axis. We draw ever smaller circles into this spiral. Before I get even more specific on training, I'm going to give you this spiral analogy in a bit more detail. So in life, when we go through growth phases and seasons and cycles, sometimes it seems like we're going up and down. That growth is non-linear and quite confusing sometimes. We don't really know what up and down is a lot of the time. If you map that in a more three-dimensional open way, it's not just ups and downs, right? Because the downs teach you things. The downs need to be experienced so you can have the ups, because you take the lessons from the discomfort. And sometimes the surprises that hit you from left field end up becoming the things which shape you in a way that you later on really value. So if we collapse time for a second and we just say, all of these parts are important in helping me become more me, whatever that is, then it's not up and down, it's around, it's back and forth. I'm going out here and exploring to come back here. And all the time we're overcorrecting, right? Like you get out of one relationship which was super codependent, and then the next one you're trying to be super independent, and then you realize that like you do have to open to someone. And so in all of these aspects of life, I train way too hard in the gym with barbells, then I go to yoga and it becomes super, super gentle. And I'm like, nah, that's too gentle. I need to still train a bit, but maybe it's more intuitive and gymnastics based. Oh no, I need to relax. It's not just gymnastics. It's like, we draw in closer always to our midline, to this sense of love, safety, and belonging. We spiral inward. We fall into the center of the spiral until our revolutions into getting lost and found again become so small that we're just oscillating and vibrating quickly, and we're like, we're just learning all the time. And we start to enjoy these departures because it's like being a kid on one of those swingy things that spins around. And if you spin around too much, you get sick. But a little bit of this like, whee, through life, the color, the experience, it's good if you feel like it's bringing you back to your center. If you feel like you're losing yourself and you're spiraling out, then that can be more challenging. So the spiral, the behavior, finding your center, it's both physical, structural, and it's metaphysical, esoteric. And for these things to make sense, they all have to be one. So finding your posture, the next thing we can do is start to stress test that. And the way we stress test that is we open to some chaos. Once you have a reference point of this is what home feels like, this is how I need to relate to my body, or how I can if I would like to, drawing in, breathing, feeling this warm airbag of support in my belly. As I breathe in, it is expanding like an energy ball. As I breathe out, it's releasing, and I'm relaxing. I breathe in, it comes back, smoothing out the edges, smoothing out the need to stop, cut in, out. Breath isn't like, it's like a good conversation. So as you get used to breathing more fluidly, light, slow, deep, LSD breathing, and as you start to relax into your posture and feel that in your belly, more specifically, let's go specific, through the diaphragm, this main diaphragm, between the pelvic floor and the which is at the base of the pelvis, like the pelvis is a bowl of sorts, and the parachute, which is kind of what it looks like of the diaphragm. We're creating this action and staying in touch with that action, that in and out, that increase and decrease in pressure, in tension, in stretch, release. With your posture, that's what we're going to keep as a reference point while you begin to test with stress. Now, some stresses are very difficult to manage. It's like if you're training a puppy and you want that puppy to be well socialized with other dogs, taking it to the dog park where there might be some like other crazy dog is a bit risky. It could go okay, maybe it won't, maybe you'll have a traumatic experience. So in order to have a somewhat manageable chaos, what we do is just put ourselves in challenging postures. And one such posture is horse stance. Horse stance is or horse rider stance is essentially a martial arts posture where you're holding a squat of sorts. But rather than sitting back into that squat and tilting your body forward, you try to just drop down with your hips over your heels. You just, on your haunches, you kind of lower. And this requires a degree of hip mobility, like internal rotation, abduction. Abduct meaning to go away from midline, like an alien abduction. An alien is abducting you, taking you from your midline, taking you from the earth, which is your middle. Internal rotation meaning that you sit down and go wide, but you can still keep your feet and knees relatively forward as you sit forward. That's going to require internal rotation in your hips. Because we want to keep this sense of the polarity of the spine as much as possible. It's okay if there's some forward tilt while you squat, because not everyone's built the same way and we don't have the same ranges. But that internal feeling of being relatively upright, whatever that feels like for your unique anatomy, that is what we're looking for. Sitting down, not sitting back and leaning forward. Initially, you'll have a narrow stance because it's hard to have the hip mobility to go wide unless you have it already. Over time, we build to a wider and lower stance, dropping the hips towards parallel with the knees, taking the feet up to 7 steps apart, even more, even towards splits, but while being upright, or relatively upright. When we hold this position, it generates a lot of discomfort because we're not looking for bony discomfort or pinching or pain or anything like that, but we're looking for this muscular effort, this sense that we're holding ourselves just above our maximum depth, not resting into the stretch, but actually actively holding ourselves with our muscles in horse stance. And usually the arms are out in front, like this, and the fingertips are kind of like waterfalls, or there's a sense of circularity and containment, containing this big warm pot. And then resting, not binding, but kind of resting into that and holding, directing circles. We'll get into that in a second. So when we're in horse stance, we're meeting the legs burning. The movement gets spicy, or the hold gets spicy. And we start to feel like this sensation of discomfort is rising up in the body like a fire. Like Bane in Batman, the fire rises. The fire rises up in you. Warmth, it feels like you've got hot water bottles on your legs. And what this is doing is it's shaking you up, right? Because fire burns away impurities. Fire is testing. Fire burns what you are not, but it burns. And so you're feeling this, and at the same time seeking to rest into your midline and into your belly, or the diaphragm and the breath. So essentially the axis, the spine, and the breath. While you're still, and the horse stance is going to try to make you breathe into your chest. Well, it's not trying. No one's trying. It's just happening. You're just reacting to these sensations because you don't feel that they're part of you, and you don't feel safe while they're around. So your nervous system goes into like fight or flight. It's very difficult. You tense up. You might start to shake. The thoughts that are associated with parts of you that you don't like, or that you're not enjoying the experience of because you can't show it love, you don't have the capacity yet, you don't have the circuitry, the circuit board to handle such electricity. It's being tested. The demons are coming out. You want to get out of it. All you can think of is, how much time do I have left? But if you can rest into that, then you're alchemizing those feelings into gold. You're turning it into fertilizer. The manure, the shitty stuff, becomes your growth. And you're saying, okay, this experience of fire and discomfort, if I continue to breathe into it and I don't try to push it away, but nor do I indulge in listening excessively or acting on the whims of these inner voices, you're wrapping that experience in a much larger awareness. Your midline, your sense of yourself is so connected, and you're constantly coming back to the center of the spiral, that as the fiery sensations are drawing you out into thought and into reactivity, you're wrapping it in love, you're wrapping it in home and belonging. And so you're teaching discomfort, you're teaching chaos, you're teaching the unknown and disintegrated or dismembered parts of you how to remember and reintegrate into love, safety, belonging, and home. You're giving them a place to be, and you are a safe place to be. By becoming safe, you make that which is around you safer, more loving. So now you can see you're willingly putting yourself there, but if you then went out into something that's less controlled, where you can't necessarily just hop out of that uncomfortable position after 90 seconds because that's when you've had enough. Let's say a family member is sick. That becomes an opportunity for you to then apply your physical practice to a real world scenario. So instead of reacting to seeing them looking really unwell and getting like freaking out and then saying something silly when you meant to comfort them, you can rest into your midline. Everything we've talked about. You can envelop that very challenging, very real, very tangible experience of challenge, discomfort, parts of life that you don't particularly enjoy right now, in a sense of, but it's safe within me because I am here. And if I can observe it, and if I am feeling it, then as awareness, this deep, 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 empty part of myself, I can be full of all of this, and it's okay because I'm here. And if I wasn't here, then I couldn't handle it. And you can draw that feeling in to the body, through the body. Use the body to filter in your experience in a way which creates love, and then reside behind that in love. So the body is a gateway. Physical training and stress testing and cultivation of this ability to fall into your midline in the center of the spiral, regulate the nervous system by breathing, finding your axis, detensioning, or just being ready but open. That is the magic. That becomes the healing. That becomes your own healing. That becomes the healing for those around you. The physical practice is a way to do that, but it's a gateway into love. It's a gateway into awareness. When you can hold difficult things with loving awareness, which requires a lot of skill, it's not just complete, you don't just relax, but you're releasing need because you are yourself complete and cultivated. It requires skill, it requires practice because we've been so dismembered by life. And it's no one's fault. When you're young, you may have this pure awareness within you, but your physical body and your being and your personality doesn't have many parts to it. It's very permeable. It's like a tiny little translucent sponge. We learn to add these parts or qualities or patterns to deal with the world around us, and these parts become our personality. So we have more parts as we get older. And if we're not relating to our parts often and reintegrating them actively, then we can be fragmented by life because we have to do all of these different things, wear all of these different hats, be all of these different people. And the older you get, the more there is to integrate, the more complex you become. So it's not that life is breaking you apart in this horrible way and you're forgetting yourself because the world is this place that you should escape and that like it's a threat. It's like, no, life's just making you more. Life's just giving you more parts because you have to learn to deal with very real scenarios. You can't just be without skill. How would you make money? How would you protect your family if you're a man? How would you nourish your family if you're a woman? Or whatever roles you want to put those into. Without skill, you can't reintegrate. So reintegrating means cultivating skill. Physical, the ability to build, the ability to create, the ability to love, the ability to communicate, express. These are all things that help us to take that beautiful purity of awareness and love that we're born with and help them be felt and shared and transferred in a world where there are things to do and things to deal with that aren't going away. So a horse stance could be a part of your weekly practice. You could apply the same thing to running as the discomfort rises and as you want to get away, check the time, plug into music. If you're doing that to distract yourself, then explore what it would be like. Instead of seeing the sensations as a distraction, to see the sensations as opportunities for cultivation and to feel more agency and skill within yourself. Lean into that. And then if you eventually want to plug in some music, you can, but just be aware of, am I escaping my experience? Am I looking to be drawn away from myself? Or am I using what is challenging to find my way back to the center? All of these holding patterns we find ourselves in, particular ways of tensing up, particular thoughts that come up when we're stress testing our nervous system, these are our personality. And recognizing that we've needed the parts which form this personality, recognizing that we've needed these behavioral patterns to deal with the world, which then become holding patterns, helps us to feel into our posture without hating ourselves. Like, okay, I've got this tight right shoulder, but that's okay. Like, there's a reason it's tight. There's always a reason why something is like tightened up. The body reacts intelligently to things. But you can help it by coming top down with this knowledge that you've created these holding postural patterns because you've been sitting a lot at a desk and you've been stressed and you've been up high and bound in your head and your shoulders trying to get things done. And you can say, well, I know I've been doing that, so I'm going to give myself the opportunity to explore the other end of the spectrum for a while and decide where I really want to be instead of having life decide for me. There's that top-down approach of like, I can see what's happening and I'm helping myself. And then you can also have times in your day where as you drop down, you're like, you know what, body, what would you like to experience? What is my body asking for right now and how can I go and facilitate that? And that means you might have a particular practice, but it also means like you might need to clean your room. You might need to go and deal with something so that you can help your body to experience a sense of peace, relaxation. And we can come at this from multiple layers. So we work with the body, we cultivate this deep sense of home within ourselves, but knowing that we can't feel stable unless we have structure means that we're going to address structure on every level. Physical, emotional, whatever we want to break them up into, we're going to have structure in the way we organize our day, because within structures, within the bones of our life, we're able to draw inwards and soften. There's no softness without structure. There's no power without stillness. There's no love without being able to open to that which definitely feels difficult. And so you need to attune to all of it, be open, receptive, and aware, not just to that which you like out of familiarity, but to the parts of yourself that don't currently feel like you at all. When you're integrating parts, an example is a meditation or a psychedelic trip. A bad trip is just you meeting parts of life which you don't want to be parts of yourself, but they're not going anywhere and they are parts of you already. You're already experiencing them, therefore they are parts of your experience of life. A productive, challenging trip is where you're able to incorporate and integrate those parts which you weren't quite ready to meet, bring them to the table to have a productive dialogue with them and decide how you want those parts of life experience to relate so that you can feel more at home in all of it. And it's the same with meditation. A beautiful meditation isn't just one where you get everything you want and you feel that you're ascending and floating up to heaven. It's equally beautiful and perhaps even more of a reflection of the potential of love when you feel things which you consider to be almost demonic within yourself. Because if you can meet those things with openness and with attunement, then you teach that experience how to come to a beautiful table, to have this lovely, loving dinner with all of the parts. So that's it. That's nervous system regulation, the overview. I wanted to give you a very broad, very lifelike picture of what this is and mention a couple practical things you can lean into through your day. And perhaps in future videos we'll go into depth of like what's happening right now while I'm holding horse stance. What am I thinking? What am I working with? And how can you apply that? But hopefully this has given you some value. So it's all bringing the parts, remembering as opposed to dismembering, not having a disconnected head from body, not pointing to things that you're already experiencing, therefore they're already parts of you as separate, but acknowledging that if you're experiencing it, it is a part of you. It's becoming a part of you in a particular way already, and you have a choice as to how you would like that meeting to happen. Claiming that agency and that power is the ultimate thing that you can do as a human being. And one way to access that is through the reference point of the midline, the spinal axis, the breath, and releasing muscle tone, exploring how you're holding or guarding your posture, and alchemizing into flow and containing all of that suffering with a sense of love and grounding, as powerful as the center of the solar system, the solar plexus. Much love.